Hey everyone, this is Gray Crawford, and I'm so excited to be here with my friend Gemini Brett. Welcome, Gemini Brett.
Greetings, Gray. It's awesome to see you. It was so great to see you on Earth at Norwalk
Yeah,
weeks
absolutely.
back.
Yeah, and you're one of my favorite astrologers. I love how you bring in mythology as well as connecting everything to the living sky. You're somebody that really has done some of the most important work as far as really connecting all of us back to the living sky and really coming into relationship with that. So really appreciate your work around all of that.
Thank you for that. And that's what we're doing together here today, right? Where the myths and the living sky and the astrology all converge.
Absolutely. So yeah, we are getting together right now to talk about the Homeric Hymn to Hermes and how that connects into the synodic cycle of the planet Mercury. When we mentioned, yeah, we just saw each other recently at the Norwalk Astrology Conference, and we were talking, and you're referencing some different things about the cycle and how, for example, the mother of Hermes is Maia, who's one of the nymphs of the Pleiades, as well as your daughter, and how we could even think about Zeus and Maia being together in the story and mating and giving birth to Hermes, even lining up with the planet Jupiter, making contact with the Pleiades and the star of Maia, and how that could all line up with the synodic cycle. A lot of people, I think, already when they hear the Homeric hymn to Hermes, especially because one of the things that happens early on is Hermes stealing the cattle of Apollo and marching them backwards. I think for most people that really evokes the Mercury cycle and creates a lot of wonderment and sort of awe about, was this part of this story, because it seems to really go with the retrograde. And so it's even more fascinating to think about the idea that there could even have been perhaps an astrology chart that could actually even be sort of telling this Homeric hymn story. Also, when we just get into the symbolism of the Homeric hymn, there's just all sorts of fascinating information about Hermes and about Mercury that we can also go into, and I'm sure we'll end up talking about right here. And what I also just want to add in before we get going is that what's pretty amazing with the timing is that you and I are talking right now at the time that Mercury, the planet, is separating about 15 degrees away from the sun, moving direct. And so we have a Mercury evening rising phase coming into visibility as an evening star, like right now, like today as we're talking. So that's also just a really amazing synchronicity.
Yeah, and on the other side, in the morning sky, this is around the time of the year when the Pleiades return from
You're
their
right.
annual burning under the beams of the sun. And as you mentioned, Gray, my daughter's name is Maia, so like the Greek Maia, and named for the mother of Hermes and the daughter of Atlas. And that had come in for me um, during an earlier pregnancy that didn't come full term, with a miscarriage. And Anna, I think, was a little hesitant with the name for that reason, but also because it didn't come to her necessarily. It did, it came to us, right? Um, the way that her son Koa's name came in is quite a magical tale.
Mm.
But so it had come in for me, and then all of these things were happening astronomically that just kept supporting that this soul's name is meant to be Maya, including, I think it was the year before her birth, Maya and the rest of the Pleiades, right? So Maya is one of the seven daughters of Atlas, who is known as the Pleiades, of Atlas and Pleione. And in that cluster of the sky, we see Atlas and Pleione hanging out. And then we have the seven
Mm.
sisters, or some say six, and there's all different stories about the one that disappeared and which one that was and why. One of them, one of the candidates would be maybe be Maya. But the Pleiades, because of the precession of the equinoxes, have been slowly processing from tropical Taurus to tropical Gemini. So after like 2160 years in Taurus, moving into Gemini, and in a way, it kind of feels like the mother of Hermes processing into Hermes or Mercury's sign of Gemini feels like kind of a homecoming there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think what Alcyone or Alcyone is already about 0, 1 Gemini. No, Tayete is I think around 27. Is Maya around 27 Taurus? A lot of them are kind of around that 27 to like
Maya's
first
now in
degree. Oh,
Gemini. I
Maya's in
think,
Gemini.
yeah,
Okay.
I think the last ones we have are, and I can put a chart on the screen actually, um, are in like 29th degree and will be moving over pretty soon. Let's take a
Okay.
peek. So somewhere
For
in
some
here I
reason,
have all the Pleiades.
oh,
Yeah,
awesome.
so Pleione, it looks like with Atlas, who are kind of like the parents, right, are on the leading edge. So in this
Mm,
moment, we have Pleione at 43 arc minutes of tropical Gemini and Atlas right there. And then Alcyone is like the star, as you know, Gray, most work with as like the Bohemian star or magical star
mm-hmm.
of Mercury within the cluster, now at 20 arc minutes, so a third of the way into Gemini. So we're recording today on Jupiter's or Mars's day, Tuesday, June 10th, 2025. And then Electra is actually the at the tail, if you will, or the stern of this Pleiadian ship, 29 degrees 45 minutes of Taurus. So only a fourth of a degree of precession, right? Or the equinox is precessing through the stars, or the stars processing through the tropical sign. So a quarter of a degree of precession takes about 18 years, which is a fourth of
Mm.
72 years per degree of precession, right? So yeah, pretty soon we'll have all the Pleiades in Gemini, and we're living at this pretty amazing time where the Pleiades describe a cusp of the tropical zodiac in our sky.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it doesn't stop there. As you know, Regulus has
Mm.
recently, it was like late 2011, processed from Leo, where it kind of feels like Regulus fits right across the gateway into tropical Virgo.
Mm-hmm.
So Regulus is marking that cusp right now. And then square to that, we have the Pleiades marking the Taurus Gemini cusp.
Mm.
Auretia, the knot that ties the two fish together, is at a cusp right now too.
Yeah.
Um,
Really
and
close
so
to
you go through
Pisces.
these, yeah, you go through these times in
I mean
precession
Taurus,
where,
sorry.
well, actually, Aries.
Yeah, it's at the very end of Aries, getting
Yeah.
close to Taurus. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's hard stuff to like talk about with showing without showing the images. Maybe it's not where we're going to go, but really before we can even tie the Homeric hymn into the cycle of Hermes, like, what you were interested in hearing from me is like, oh, it's also about the synodic cycle of Jupiter
Mm-hmm.
and the synodic cycle of Maia, right? One
Mm-hmm.
of these Pleiadian stars, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore the cycle of Sun, Mercury, Jupiter, Maia.
Mm-hmm.
And the way for them to align to best perform this tale, it's a pretty rare thing. I thought it was less rare than it was when I started like doing some research for our journey together today. Um, because I've always said I'm going to do this, but it's like you don't find that many instances. And one of them is going to take us all the way back to around the time it's thought that the Homeric hymn was written, And I think that in a kind of the old astrology way, this was an event that people experienced in the heavens
Mm.
and then wrote a tale about it. But I mean, the Homeric Hymn of Hermes, it's so much more than a tale. It's an incantation and an honoring, a reverence, so much more about this amazing being who guides us and everybody that's been called to our craft.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, so when we're talking about these cycles, like you're saying, the synodic cycle, all the planets have, for people that just aren't familiar, they have phases of visibility and invisibility. And so when the planet is together with the sun by degree, it's being reanimated, sort of reseeded with light, and then it will emerge into its visible phase at its heliacal rising. Mercury, of course, orbiting in between us and the sun, does this twice within one of its whole cycles. It does it fast and direct, like it's doing today as we're talking. It also does it retrograde, moving in between us and the sun, appearing to move backwards through the zodiac. Jupiter is also right now in a phase of invisibility as you and I are talking, getting ready to head towards a conjunction with the sun and then re-emerging into visibility. And then stars, as long as they're not a circumpolar star that never sets, will also go through phases of visibility and then disappearing and then having this very dramatic heliacal rising, which would be a big marker of calendars and festivals and sacred events. And the Pleiades in particular are really important related to this. I know some things I've seen, maybe you might know a little bit more with the dating of this, but I know it's often thought that, in the past they were rising more around that sort of spring equinox time period. They are in sidereal Taurus. So like actually my moon in Gemini is conjunct Alcyon, but if I were to cast my sidereal chart, I would have this Taurus moon instead of a Gemini moon. Um, and I know there's even ideas I've read in some books about perhaps even the exaltation of the moon being Taurus could very well be about how important the Pleiades were and the moon becoming visible and being seen to kind of moving across the Pleiades. They're even considered, even though they're not really the first numbered lunar mansion, I know some people also really think they're kind of like that initiating, starting kind of lunar mansion. It just has that power. And what's pretty amazing with precession is now, like you were mentioning, we're talking right now towards the end of the sun is now in the third decan of Gemini, heading towards the solstice, and now we are in a time where the Pleiades, for many people, are rising around the summer solstice, which is also in the northern hemisphere, also just really powerful and a really cool moment and yeah, a period of time that we're living in now and really in relation to them.
Yeah, so let's talk about star cycle first. In a
Yeah.
sense, it's the simplest of these. And yeah, I've been told that the Babylonian, like the Chaldean astronomers way back in the day, would use Pleiadian happenings as kind of the beginning of an ideal year. Some say that there was a time when the Pleiades were the gateway of the first nakshatra, and then that eventually was
Mhm.
shifted. Um, we can see in Hesiod's Work and Days, right? He says this when the Pleiades, daughters of Atlas, are rising, begin your harvest, and you're plowing when they are going to set. 40 nights and days they are hidden and appear again as the year moves round, when first you sharpen your sickle. And he goes on, right? But we wouldn't want to use that recipe today because we've had about a month's worth of precession, a little bit more. So while then the Pleiades would be seen with their heliacal rise in, well, let's call it May, the month named for Maia, by the way, in the in the calendar that many of us are using today. Like nowadays, they're rising at June. And actually, an amazing thing about our Maia's birth, she was born on June 16th, 24.
Mm.
The day before, I was out in my eastern sky place, and I, for the first time, saw the heliacal rise of the Pleiades with my zoom lens. And then the day after her birth, the day of her birth, I was there. The day after her birth, I went out to make this recording of this is the closest I can get to how the stars were when you entered, right?
Wow, it's
Um,
amazing.
and I saw that day the Pleiades with my naked eye.
Wow, that's so
So
beautiful.
she came in right at this heliacal rise of the Pleiades, and so now in our day, this is happening in early June. But it's like an interesting thing to hear when we tune into this old work from Hesiod. First of all, just aligning and agrarian calendar with the stars. So we often love to say as astrologers these days that astrology and astronomy are one and the same. And all the astronomers practiced astrology and vice versa. But I also kind of feel they're different things. For me, I like to say astronomy is the measurable side of the heavenly happenings, like
Mm-hmm.
the stuff you can put a ruler to or design a calendar with. And that astrology is the high art that connects that measurable quantity with the immeasurable quality correspondences, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so why start measuring it all? Because life and we got to eat. And whether you're nomadic, right? When to go. And not only like the stars to follow to get to that next place, right? Where the elk will be, or the berries on the bush or whatever it is, or you're an agrarian society, like when to plant, when to sow, all of these things, right? And so you start forming a relationship in following the cycles of the sun and of the moon and of the
Mm-hmm.
stars. And as you know, Gray, you can only spend so much time like connecting in before you start getting weird, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing that in a sense, astronomy and following the lights and the cycles was born in a sense out of necessity. And then that what came through is also understanding more about the mysteries and like the ceremonial
Mm-hmm.
timings that come forth, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
When we hear this of, when the Pleiades are rising, do this, and then when they're setting, it's like, wait, what? Because the Pleiades rise and set every day. And it's important to know that that's not what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about the annual rising and the setting. And I'm just going to rewind a little bit and speak about, the maybe the most basic synodic cycle that we've all connected to. Synod means meeting, and this would be the cycle of the sun and the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Or really, we should say the moon and the sun because it's good to speak the name of the faster moving being first, right? So, as we know, every month or every month, the moon goes into the flames to get burned and reborn, perhaps. And there's something so transformational when that kind of elder moon, that balsamic crescent that we see before sunrise, goes into the flames of the sun and then later is reborn in the sunset west, right? With Diana's bow, that sliver crescent smile of the moon, that evidence of her monthly survival by fire trial, and Diana's bow, right? Artemis's bow, like she's always aiming arrows at her brother Apollo, who has just set.
Mm-hmm.
So most of us work new moon on a chart, and it's that moment of the synod, which means meeting, right? So the moon sun conjunction, earth moon sun alignment, new moon. But really, unless it's an eclipse and you happen to be in the place on Earth where there's some shadow play, a new moon is a no moon, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no moon for you. Typically, like the day before, the day of, and even the day after the conjunction. And then the moon is reborn in the sunset west. So many of the traditions, like currently the Chinese lunar calendar or the Hebrew, which comes from the Babylonian, from the Akkadian lunar calendar, many of the traditions that keep their days and the months in alignment with the phases of the moon, they actually begin their days at sunset,
Mm-hmm.
which seems kind of crazy, right? It's like, wait, isn't
Mm-hmm.
that the end of the day? But that's when you see the first moon of the month,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so if that's the image, right, the visual experience of your month beginning, because now we see the moon, that's like the true visual new moon, right? That sliver crescent. In Hawaii, they call it the hilo moon. Hilo
Mm-hmm.
means first. And they have a name for every 30 days of the lunar phases, which is amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you see that, like that's the beginning of the first day. And so, of course, the beginning of the next day is going to be a day later. And
That's
then, by the
also
way,
mm,
go ahead, Gray.
I was gonna say in last year, along with our friend Jason Hawley, we led a group of people through some sacred sites in Greece, and being in some of those temple spaces and being in that Adyton, like the place of like the god, where the living, statue of the god was. Those were not in every case, but typically it's also set in the western part of the temple, which was just making me think about some of those same things that you're talking about, even like the day then kind of beginning, and that's kind of where you'd be facing like the divinity. Yeah.
Yeah, and that setting place as well, right? Where the sun sets and the night begins. There's something so mysterious. It calls us into the mysteries of the darkness and the like in that
Hmm.
place, right? So many traditions have felt ancestry in the West. For me, it's kind of more in the buried place, like down at the IC. But that's beautiful to learn. I think there's so much sense to that. And really the West, we get to experience the marriage of heaven and earth, whether
Mm.
it's the sun coming down to meet the earth at the end of the day, or after the sun sets and the other stars come to play, we get to see when we look to the west in every moment the western sky coming to kiss the rising earth, and it's such a beautiful image of marriage in that way. So what a cool thing to learn. Yeah, so it's important to know that the original zodiacs were not solar, they were lunar. So like Gray mentioned lunar mansions before. And it's hard to like even envision that in modern times when we all had this gateway drug called sun sign astrology into the
Hmm.
craft, right?
Yeah.
And even getting outside, it's like, hey, what sign is the sun in right now? Now, by the way, there's ways that we can do that with the length of the shadow at midday.
Mm.
Right, and this is in the Mula Pin, like the ancient Babylonian star tables. Like they were actually tracking the length of the shadow, like of a gnomon of a sundial. Where on the horizon the sun is rising or setting, right? We're recording this just as the sun's at its northern extreme, right? The Gemini takes the sun to the Tropic of Cancer, and tropics comes from tropikos, Greek for turn around, right? Then the sun will stop and turn around and head south for 6 months. And you can see that, by the way, in the Cancer glyph, right? It's like moving
Mm.
north for 6 months, stopping to turn around, heading south. You can watch that on your horizon every year with the sun, or every month with the moon, right? Who actually has more pull on the tides, where the crabs walk sideways and the ocean walks sideways, right? Like there's so much deep astronomy and sacred astronomy, even in these glyphs that we use to depict these signs of time. And there's so much astronomy to the tropical zodiac, which I always love to say loudly because we live at a time where so many people have forgotten it. And even will say that because the tropical signs are not aligned to the constellations as they once were, or can
Hmm.
never align perfectly because constellations don't equally divide the path of the sun, that it's just symbolic or something. And oh no, there's so much astronomy there. And importantly, even when we go back to Babylon, where it was more of a star-based zodiac at first, they were also keeping tropical time with like the shadow length at midday. You can
Mm.
see at Vatican Square a nifty stolen obelisk positioned where the length of the uh, shadow's obelisk at midday is measured against the line of tropical zodiac signs in the brick. So it's a lot easier, I would suggest, to actually know once you crack the codes where the sun is in the tropical zodiac, which I
Mm.
feel is kind of the most elegant solar calendar ever created, as we're tracking the sun through 30 degrees of space, right? And
Hmm.
these like 30-degree signs of a 360-degree circle in this whole thing. But to
Hmm.
do that visibly, like if you want to see what stars the sun is aligned to in any moment of time, you will go blind trying. And so, of course, the original zodiacs of watching the moon move through the stars.
Hmm.
And we forget now how crucial moon phase is. I mean, you don't. And so many people listening right now have initiated themselves. And some people actually live away from the city lights and whatnot. But I'm in Berkeley, California right now. Like, there's few places I can go without hopping in a car where I'm going to experience any change in the light between new moon and full.
Mm.
It's just street lamp,
Yeah. It would have been
right?
so different.
Yeah, and you don't travel at new moon time. Like
Mm.
I do, that's when I want to get on a plane and go to a dark sky space and really be with the Milky Way and those things. And sometimes I'm invited to go speak and Sedona or whatever, and it's full moon time, and I'm like, oh, really? Because now I'm not going to see the Milky Way because that big full moon will kind of eat the sky a bit, you know? But then I can take the night hike, and you're just not sweating at all. You don't have a flashlight. Like you have the big light in the sky, right? And moon time, and you could see any snake or tarantula on the path or whatever you're worried about. It's like it's amazing to go out in nature in that silver light. And of course, back in the day, like you're less worried about robbers on the road or the
Mm-hmm.
potholes or anything like that. And I really think taking back a connection to the waxing and the waning of the
Mm-hmm.
moon and the growing moon and the shrinking moon and kind of the young moon, the maiden and the full kind of mother moon and the
Mm-hmm.
wise one, the crone at the end of the cycle. Like it really helps us return to cyclical consciousness awareness and like the beautiful importance of how much astronomical cycles influence our energetic experience as earthlings, right?
Yeah, totally. And so, like you're saying, the that moon cycle and the moon disappearing at the very end of the cycle and then reappearing in light a couple days after the Sun Moon conjunction. This also happens with Jupiter and Mercury. They have their own solar phases, which are also really important to tune into because it really it's so the solar phases of the planets also have a lot of meaning and yeah, really important cycles, which, as you're saying, really magically show up in the Homeric hymn. It seems like the Homeric hymn to Hermes, which makes sense. He is our patron. He is the god of astrology. That his Homeric hymn could perhaps just be even showing us something about these cycles.
Absolutely. And I would suggest the cycles not only of Mercury, and that's how I first came to your work, Gray, like the amazing work you were presenting around looking at Mercury phases and where we are at in the synodic cycle of Mercury through dilated, like fractal time, as I like to say, in the secondary
Mm,
progress chart, which is a really amazing place to go. And what changes if you were born, for example, with Mercury invisible and
hmm
then there's a time in your life when Mercury becomes visible.
hmm
Or if you're born with Mercury retrograde, and there's a time in your life through our kind of fractal timing techniques, Mercury stations direct or then goes into the flames of the sun and all of these magical things. And with Mercury, and it should be this way, it's kind of tricky to get it.
hmm
So let's start with stars. And, you know, if I wanted to know where the sun is in the stars now, again, I'm never going to see through the sun. I'll go blind trying. There is a wonderful game, which is to be with the moon, because you can see the stars that the moon is aligned with. And if you get to know the aspects between the moon and the sun through the shape of the moon's smile, as I like to say, from the
mm,
sliver crescent to the full O,
uh-huh.
right? Like there's a specific look. You know, the easiest one, of course, would be like the square moons. When moon is square sun, the waxing half or the waning half moon, you get that weird straight line in such a curvy being the moon. But
hmm
you know at that time the moon is 90 degrees from the sun. So if I see the moon, for example, waxing half at Regulus, who I know because I prefer the tropical zodiac, which I'll say is the zodiac of Earth, then I know the moon is 90 degrees from the sun, right? And if the moon's at one Virgo and 90 degrees beyond the sun, then the sun's at one Gemini, right? But you can learn like the shape of a sextile moon or even the shape of a quintile moon if you're going to go there, right? Like what a quincunx moon looks like. I actually prefer like 12 phases for the moon so we can really kind of get with the whole sign aspect. So like the semi-sextile, sextile, waxing square, waxing trine, waxing quincunx like that. Once you start
hmm
learning those phases, it's you can kind of like just as Diana delivered Apollo's birth,
mm
you can let the smile of the moon and where she is in the
mm.
stars deliver that information of where the sun resides, right? But games that we also play,
Yeah, that's really amazing. I never thought about that connection of Artemis midwifing Apollo Yeah, it's beautiful that you could then look at the moon and figure out where the sun is. Yeah. Oh, sorry, keep going. I just hadn't ever thought of that
Well,
that connection between them before.
their
Yeah.
mother's being chased by the serpent, right? Which is a
Right.
full-on eclipse
Yeah.
story, and that's a tale for another time.
Yeah.
Another wonderful thing, by the way, just while we're there, is if you point one of your arms to the moon and the other to the sun, you can really feel the shape of an aspect in your body.
Hmm.
And you can do this with other planets and stars too, but like it's the moon and the sun, that like just kind of beautiful, deep cycle of spirit and soul and matter. You can feel the difference between a square and a trine.
Mm-hmm.
And like just helping you bring more of this out of the Olympus dome of the brain and into the earth, into the body mind, I find it's always helpful, right? So anyway,
Absolutely.
another way we can tell time is by looking at which stars are rising before the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you are a creature of the night, don't worry, you don't have to wake up before sunrise. What stars are setting after the sun, right?
Mm.
So the
Mm-hmm.
beams of the sun, as Gray mentioned before, in the Hellenistic tradition, are 15 degrees to either side of the sun, right? And check that out. That's a sign, right? So the
Yeah.
sun, in this way, with its light, takes a sign's worth of sky. Right. And if you look at the circumpunct, right, the symbol that we use to depict the sun, right, the circle of spirit around that kind of closed dot of source. On one level, I can see like the sun orbiting the earth or the earth orbiting the sun in that glyph. But you can also see like the sun and then its like breath of light, right?
Mm.
The beams 15 degrees to one side, 15 degrees to the other. Like it'd be nice if there was a button on our astrology softwares we could hit where the sun would kind of grow that big so you could really see the beams kind of taking over planets and stars that are nearby.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So when Hesiod's talking to us about the annual risings of the Pleiades and the settings of the Pleiades, right, there's going to be a time each year when we're looking at the Pleiades in the evening sky. So the sun sets and there's the Pleiades. And so by the way, as I was saying before, like that young moon, that sliver crescent moon, like that was actually the visual experience of the new moon, the beginning of the new month, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's said that when you saw that crescent moon at the Pleiades, that's kind of the ideal structure for the new year.
Mm.
And that doesn't happen every year because of the rhythm of the sun and the moon. It takes 19 years, the so-called metonic cycle, for the polyrhythms of Earth, Sun, the seasons, the year, and Earth, Moon, Sun, the lunation, the phases, to synchronize. Right, so 19 years is almost exactly equivalent to 235 lunations. So if you get that sliver crescent moon at the Pleiades at sunset, just so you can barely see it, and then they will follow the sun into the earth beneath, right? Um, that's going to happen again in 19 years, right? And that would
Mm.
kind of be like the principal beautiful year, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we journey here into these the Homeric Hymn of Hermes and how this might show up in the skies, as I sure believe it does, it doesn't happen every time. That doesn't mean like the energy's not there. And
Mm-hmm.
in fact, it happened last year when my daughter Maia was born, not in its completion, like Mercury wasn't so involved. And it'll happen this year with Jupiter and Mercury, but not with Maia.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll show you that, and then we're going to hunt down a couple times when it was like all happening, and one of them is going to bring us back to 800 BC, which is likely when this hymn was written. And I might even suggest likely like what wrote this hymn.
Right. That's fascinating.
So let's look. I'm going to bring us to Stellarium astronomy software. This is on your screen, yes, Gray?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Okay, we're in Athens, Greece, because why not? I mean, for the birth of Hermes, we might go to Mount Selene
Yeah, that would
um,
be the other yeah. Mm-hmm.
in Arcadia, right?
Mm-hmm. It's in Arcadia, yeah.
But it's also like due west of Athens.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
it's going to experience the sky in the same way, besides something very important for this puzzle, which is the shape of the landscape.
Mm.
Right? Because here in stellarium right now, I just have like a flat western horizon, and we're even kind of seeing down beneath the ground. Um, and it's very rarely like that, right? Even if you're looking at the water's edge, typically the tides and whatnot, right? So imagine some trees and some things. I mean, I could push buttons in this amazing astronomy software and make that happen, but I don't think we need to. But that will be something that we want to consider along the way. I'm going to go back a few months from when we are recording. So this is March 10th, 2025. And actually, you know what? I'm going to go back a year before then. So here's March 10th, 2024.
Mm-hmm.
It's 11:11 p.m. in Athens, Greece on that day, because why not? So if any of you are listening in an audio version of this, time to put something down and come look at the screen, or else it's going to really sound disconnected, all right? But where we're looking at this time, and I think I'll rewind time, we'll come to sunset, is the sun is setting, and just after the sun sets, as we're looking west, stars begin to appear on the horizon. Now, we often say that the beams of the sun extend to 15 degrees on either side, right? And I'll rewind again to before the sun sets and then after, and you've all seen a sunset, right? The sun sets, stars start coming out like high in the sky, away from the horizons that are still lit up. And we can actually see the beams of the sun following the sun to the horizon. Right, let me take you over here and you can see a photo I took some time ago. This was a moment when Venus was just re-emerging from the beams of the sun. And
Cool.
I was just like worshiping Venus, and then this owl flew and
That's
landed on this
amazing. Wow.
tree. And I asked, hey, can I take a picture of this? And I heard a yes, maybe only because I really wanted to. But the owl like hung out and just stared at me like, you're into this stuff too? I was like, totally, right? And amazingly in this image, like not as well as others I've taken, but you can really see like the redness, the combustion down here of that bit of
Mm.
the beams that's just following the sun. And then
Right.
you get to see the sky chakras or the earth chakras. It's like red, orange, yellow, green.
Mm.
You get into the blue bits, right? The chakras have been a very important part of the Venus synodic cycle, the way that it was first presented to me by my first teacher, Daniel Gemario, then at the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. And that's helped me also understand a little bit about what I'll share of Maia's cave. Okay,
Mm.
so let's go here again. We're in stellarium. It's March of 2024. And really in our lives, it's going to be this way basically at March of each year. Now,
Mm.
importantly, it really depends where on Earth you're looking from.
Mm.
So we can say things like, oh, you'll know what stars currently host the travel of the sun if you look, for example, after sunset, which are the first stars that appear on the horizon, right? So if you just kind of stay tuned to where the sun set, just be there. And it's typically like 45 minutes or something before stars in that western horizon where the sun just set begin to appear. Now, there's an issue there because all this stuff sounds great on paper. But when you start going to do it, you're like, oh, I didn't really think about this very simple thing. Like stars in some areas of the sky are much dimmer than they are in other areas of the sky.
Mm.
So, like, fun fact is the crab stars are very difficult to see, and so are the stars of the fish.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I should just say for folks listening, I like to use terms like crab and fish for constellations, and terms like Cancer and Pisces for signs, because I know them as very different things. And I think they're both very important and beautiful. So, when I'm like, if I was watching this particular scene, at this time, what I would first notice for sure are stars of the Great Square of Pegasus,
Right.
which in the Babylonian times they called the flood. Um, because these stars of the fishes are very dim. I would certainly notice Hamal, who's a bright star of the Ram constellation.
Hmm.
And I would certainly notice Jupiter. I mean, I have Jupiter like supersized in the stellarium here. Maybe I'll do this anyway, like more realistic size and labeled instead. Because Jupiter is just so bright, right? Next to Moon and then Venus, of course, following the sun, the brightest of these beings in our heavens. Yeah. Um, and I would see, well, like Jupiter is with that bright star, and who's that bright star? And as the sun continues to descend beneath the horizon as we're going into the night, that star gets brighter, and now I can connect the dots more. And now I can see, oh, that's the ram, at least according to this tradition. And here's the bull, right? And so we're looking here at Aldebaran, the eye of the bull, said to be one of the four royal stars from the Persian tradition. And then we see the Pleiades here, the great cluster that sits on the bull's back, right? All right, well, what I'm going to do, and let me actually bring the sun a little bit closer to the horizon. And I'm just going to go through days. So I just randomly on March 10th, 2024. And here's a day later, and a day later, and a day later, right? And going faster. Now we see, by the way, Mercury just
Mercury
pop
coming
out,
up. Yeah.
showing up as an evening star. And because Mercury's between Earth and the sun, and the closest planet to the sun, he never gets that far away from the sun. Mercury's just kind of popping out of the beams of the sun and heading back in and then showing up on the morning side like he is that transitional trickster, shapeshifter, right? He's also, when you see Mercury, it's typically very close to the horizon like this. And then the horizon, whether it's pollution or just the water vapes or whatever, like it makes Mercury twinkle more than most of the planets do. Because planets, as reflections of sunlight to our earthly eyes, they offer a pretty steady light, whereas the stars twinkle, right? So Mercury typically will look like a star. And it's one of the great tricks of the trickster, right? And of the shapeshifter. And there's signs where Mercury gets much higher above the horizon and others that Mercury does not. And that's another really important thing when we play this game of I know where the sun is based upon which stars I see after sunset or before sunrise. Because the signs rise at different angles to the horizon. And traditionally we call them the straight and the crooked signs. So right now we're looking at a very straight sign setting. And so like if Mercury's elongated, for example, you have like a much greater opportunity to connect visually with Mercury than if he's in a sign that's crooked, that's kind of co-setting with the sun, even if it elongated at the same distance. Now that's a lot of terminology and technical astronomy there, but you'll see as we go through some of these examples here in Stellarium, unlike what you would see in a chart, like how much this plays into it. So there are cycles where Mercury can get max from the sun, which is like 28 degrees, and you still don't get to see Mercury just because of the way from the view in Greece or California where I am, or Oregon where gray is, that particular sign sets. For that same cycle, I could go to Australia and it would be the greatest opportunity to see that Mercury. So when I'm saying like some of these things, I'll suggest, and I really suggest you get out and practice this stuff. Like when you do, you're like, yeah, these rules are like, it's good to know the rules, but they're also broken just every day. All right, and that's going to become important as we kind of get into the Homeric hymn too. So I'm just trying to set the stage here. All right, so here we are, March 25th, 2024. The sun is setting, and I'm seeing probably not these stars of the fish. Where I did see the square of Pegasus before, now I'm not really. Because the sun is now, as it does every year, aligning to those stars, and therefore those stars are rising and reaching their height and resting along with the sun, and therefore under the beams, right? And so this would be one of these cases where the sun sets, and I'm seeing Hamal and Sheridan. I'm seeing these stars of the Ram. And so after the sun sets, when you see these Ram stars, you can know that that's where the sun will go next. right? And where is the sun before it goes to the ram? It's in the fish. So I'm like, all right, this is like a fishy sun. Well, let's just keep going day by day. Now we're into April, if you're into that Gregorian trip. And now the ram is under the beams of the sun,
Hmm.
right? And so what do I see after sunset? Here's like April 26th, and I see Pleiades, right? And I see Aldebaran, and I see the bull. So the sun is setting. The first stars, after it gets dark enough for horizon stars to show near that place where the sunset, are stars of the bull, and therefore that's where the sun will go next. So the sun is currently in the ram. If you're a morning person, you wake up and you watch the eastern horizon, and the last stars you get to see before the rising beams take the stars from your sight, right? That's why the 12th house is hidden things, by the way. The sun rises into the 12th to illuminate the earth, but when he does, he hides the heavens.
Right.
And on the horizon, the heavens start disappearing, even when the sun's in the gate of Hades, which is the second, right? Then it
Right.
goes from the second to the first, gets closer to the ground, and stars close to the ground start going away, right? But the last stars that you see in the eastern horizon near where the sun rises, that's the constellation that the sun was in before, right? And now it's left that to move on its into the next position of its annual tour, right, through the constellations of the zodiac. So this looks really good on paper. You're like, whatever star you first see, that's 15 degrees away from the sun because that's the distance of the beams. But it depends if it's a straight or crooked sign, and that it's all about where on earth you're looking from, and how bright is the star, and how close to the path of the sun, and on we go. All right. But anyways, you can see on the screen right now, and let's not worry about Jupiter yet, but check out the Pleiades, right, in Maia. Now, one of the stories of the missing Pleiades, so it's believed by many that we must have been able to naked eye see more than we see now. Because in Tales of Many Lands, actually, in many, I think at least three or four different stories in the Greco-Roman tradition, like one of the daughters split or was cast aside or whatever. And one of those tales is that Maia chose to leave her heavenly abode to live more of a humble life on a cave, in a cave on earth.
Hmm.
And this we hear in the Homeric hymn. Gray, did you want to read any of the hymn?
Yeah, I could read the opening of it.
Let's hear it.
Just going into this. Sing muse of Hermes, son of Zeus and Maia, lord of Kyliene and Arcadia, the land of sheep, messenger of the gods who brings luck, born to Maia, the nymph with the beautiful hair, the shy goddess who lay in love with Zeus. She shunned the crowd of the blessed gods. She lived in a shadowy cave, and there in the depths of night the son of Kronos made love to the nymph with the beautiful hair, while sweet sleep held the white arms of Hera, eluding the gaze of immortal gods and human beings. Now, when the mind of great Zeus was fulfilled and the 10th moon was already fixed in the sky, she brought forth into the light a child, and glorious deeds were accomplished. She gave birth to a son who was versatile and full of tricks, a thief, a cattle rustler, a bringer of dreams, a spy by night, a watcher at the gate, one who was destined to bring wonderful things to light among the immortal gods. Born at dawn, he played the lyre in the afternoon, and he stole the cattle of Apollo the archer in the evening, all on the fourth day of the month, the day he was born from the lady Maia. So yeah, there's definitely an image there, like there seem to be hidden in this cave. And I think there's also something beautiful when you brought up the marriage of heaven and earth. Going to Greece, my partner Jeannie, she actually is Greek, and her ancestors are from Ithaki or Ithaca, where Odysseus is said to be from. And there's the cave of the nymphs there, and that place was just very alive with nymphs to me. And I think we see in all these stories, the nymphs there, we've talked about the idea that, they're really about this marriage of heaven and earth. There's something about the nymphs that sort of bring things down into generation. Um, and Maia, you mentioned Atlas, and her mother is an Oceanid, a daughter of Oceanus and Tethys, like these primordial water beings, water deities. I think in the Orphic cosmology, some people think there even could have been like the primordial deities, sort of like we often think of Uranus and Gaia. But yeah, there's something even just powerful about it being Maia, one of these Pleiades. It's in this cave. So we have this image here. They're secluded. They're hidden in some way, right? And so I think that's where you start seeing how these cycles start lining up, and then Hermes is born out of that.
Beautiful. And there's so much in that. Like I'm interested in the 10 moons, right? When the 10th
Yeah.
moon was fixed. I mean, interestingly, there's many types of moons, right? So we could look at the moon through the stars, what we call the sidereal month, right? So that's like the moon Pleiades. The moon is with the Pleiades again 27 and a third days later, right? And so if you multiply that by 10, you get 273 days. And that's like gestation, right?
Wow.
Like
Yeah.
it's also like 9 moons. What do I mean? Like, isn't that 10? No, because also we can look at the phases of the moon, and that's a 29 and a half day cycle,
Hmm.
right? And so 9 of the synodic, meaning moon sun cycles, the phases cycle, really Earth, moon, sun, right? Or cross crescent circle.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, 9 of those are 10 of the other. And that's
Hmm.
kind of an intriguing thing that we get to hear there. It's also, I mean, look at what they say about Hermes. Like by dawn, he's doing this at midday, in the evening, like so on the first day of his life, right? And one thing that I am surprised by in that is that it says that he plays the lyre before he steals the cattle.
Hmm.
And that's not how I understand how the tale works. So we should get back to that. But let me say a little bit more about the cave.
Hmm.
Um, so many of you, I'm sure, have been turned on to the truth that the Sumerians called Venus Inanna. And that there's this great tale, perhaps the oldest tale that we know of, the oldest tale written or chiseled in tablets so long ago, by the Sumerians, of the Venus cycle, really, of Inanna and her journey into the Kur, her sister Ereshkigal's underworld lair, and her death and rebirth, and then her return from it, right? And I had been taught that that is the time of Venus's disappearance behind the sun, right? And so that when Venus goes into the flames of the sun and in her synodic cycle with the sun and in the 19-month-ish dance of Venus with the sun and earth sky, we lose sight of Venus for like 2 to 3 months, depending on the cycle and where on earth you're looking from, right? So Venus was a morning star, and she's the fallen angel. She goes into the flames of the sun, she's gone, and then she's reborn as an evening star,
Hmm.
right? So in the shamanic astrology paradigm, which is where I got my start, now Daniel Jamaro is at the Turning of the Ages Mystery School, and my other teacher from that school, Kaylin Castell, is now at Venus Alchemy. They call the beams of the sun the underworld,
Hmm.
and many do, right? And so the idea is if a planet's so close to the sun that we can't see that planet from Earth, then it's in the underworld. And in that school, they're like, so you just add some Scorpio to it, regardless of the sign. But I think we know that it's a very transformational thing. It's always a place where I like to say, for astrologers who start with Pluto, who you'll never see with your naked eye, like, does it really matter if a planet's visible or not? But for those of us who have been drawn into the ancient approach, and I am more and more so because there's so much connection to the living sky and how we
Mm-hmm.
experience the sky from Earth, and this idea that in these cycles, the moon or the Venus or Mercury, they go through these deaths and rebirths, and that can guide us through our own personal deaths and rebirths. Like for me, that's such a imperant thing and imperative way of how I live. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? So many, I think, in modern times have shunned this idea of being under the beams of the sun, um, because, like a lot of things, traditional astrology just sounds like another thing you can call quote unquote bad. But for those of us who have a practice of being with the planets and seeing them disappear and later reemerge. That day that I took that photo with Venus, like I have tears in my eyes because I hadn't
Mm-hmm.
seen her for months, you know, and I missed
Right.
her. And back in the day, like they definitely had a different name for Venus as morning star than evening
Mm-hmm.
star. And I mean, I've heard many astronomers today say, well, that's just, they didn't even know it was the same planet. It's like, you got to be kidding me. Right? Like, obviously, they know it's the same planet. You can see it's the same planet. You're tracking the cycle. She disappeared, she reappeared. Like, there's a different name because it's a different energy.
Right.
I mean, almost a different being,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's how important these cycles are.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, I had already kind of been trained to see the beams of the sun as this underworld place.
Right.
And there's some other tales that came to me later than this one, like Orion, for example. There's a tale where Orion was
Mm.
punished for just being terrible, and he lost his sight. He was
Right.
blinded. And then Orion had to follow a young one who led him to the east to a temple of Apollo where he saw the rising sun, and then the sun restored his sight. For me, this is a tale of the heliacal setting of Orion, which is that time here is Orion, and we see Orion in the evening star, but every in the evening sky, but every day the sun gets closer and closer and closer, and then takes Orion under the beams. And for me, that's Orion being blinded. It's not Orion blinded, it's us here on Earth blind to the experience of Orion.
Right.
And then what's going to happen is the sun is going to pass Orion by, and once we get past 15 degrees, maybe a little more depending, then we can go to the morning side, the eastern temple of Apollo, the rising sun, right? And then we get to see Orion reborn,
Mm.
rising before the sunlight. And there's Orion retrieving his sight. See what I mean?
Right. Yeah. That makes sense.
When I hear in this tale that Maia leaves her heavenly abode for this shadowy cave on Earth,
Right.
I actually think it's Maia under the beams of the sun.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Zeus also being hidden because I also work with the under the beams being underworld symbolism, but it's also doing things that other people can't see, hidden activities. And so it also makes sense that Jupiter or the star of Zeus was under those beams with Maya, with the
Yeah,
star. Yeah.
and Maya aside as a practicing astrologer, Gray, I imagine, and we haven't checked in about this, but I imagine you, like me, might sometimes find that, for example, like when we started today, let's say that Mercury's sign of Virgo was on the rise, quite appropriately, and Gemini in his other place was culminating at the midheaven above, and Pisces was setting, right? So with the
Mhm.
Virgo rising Pisces setting chart, um, I've come to see that those signs and therefore their landlords, to use the old term, right? Virgo, Mercury, and Pisces, Jupiter are going to represent the relationship axis of the chart.
Mhm.
Right. So, which is for me, like I was trained, it's just like Venus and Mars every time. Like I've come to find that it might be more keyed to what was rising, what was setting, and the planets that significate those signs. And here we started as well. with Mercury about to reemerge, but also like under the beams of the sun, like in the hidden place, and with Jupiter in the hidden place.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes that can convey, when this is in a native's chart, as like hidden relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Or sometimes it's only the significator of the seventh, the other, who's in a hidden place and they've married somebody who's cheating or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, have you seen that take shape in client work?
Yeah, that definitely can be something that you see for sure. And also, it seems like in world events, just current events, things will be happening kind of behind the scenes, and then when that planet emerges into visibility, we get, announcements and things show up. There'll probably be a bunch of Mercury things showing up in these days, and then later, once Jupiter rises into visibility, we'll probably also see a bunch of Jupiter things that right now are kind of happening behind the scenes with Jupiter not being visible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
then it's tempting to want to ask you, just what will that be? I do want to say, for anybody who's listening, is like, wait a second, I have the ruler of my seventh under the beams of the sun. Don't, if maybe
Yeah.
you have had that experience with the other doing hidden things, the antidote is to find another who pursues hidden things.
Hmm.
Right. And you're listening to this, obviously you're interested in hidden things. Like astrology is one of the great gifts that helps us learn to see into the world that we can't see with our eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay. So anyway, every year I would suggest Maia goes into the cave. And again, it's working in a different way than it did in Hesiod's days, so don't farm according to his recipe, which, as we read before, he said what? When the Pleiades, daughters of Atlas, are rising, begin your harvest. Okay, in
Mm-hmm.
in this I'm reading from Theoi online. It's a wonderful place to source myths and the like. Um, and it says in brackets, I don't know who wrote this part in, when the Pleiades, daughters of Atlas, are rising in early May, begin your harvest. And you're plowing when they are going to set in November. Um, that November seems off to me, by the way, but I,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know what they're coming after with that. But importantly, like this in early May, now it's in mid-June. So again, don't follow Hesiod's recipes with the stars without updating a bit, okay? But this is a fun thing to see as well. 40 nights and days,
Yeah.
they're hidden and appear again as the year moves round, okay? So the sun moves, as we know, about 1 degree per day, 360-degree journey in about 365 days of a solar year, right? Um, and so if the beams are just 15 degrees on either side, we would say it's a kind of 30-day thing for the sun to engulf a star on the evening side, align with it, I'll say for the composting, and then for it to be reborn on the morning side. But the Pleiades are like rather dim, right? So the brightness of the star is really going to make a difference. Another thing that's really going to make a difference is whether the star is fixed or moving, right? And as we know, planetus means moving star, right? So Jupiter, for example, he's like running away from the sun as the sun
Mm.
is coming to engulf Jupiter. In the Inanna story, Inanna kind of bravely goes into the underworld, and
Right.
it's the Muzid's turn. He's like begging Utu, the sun, to turn his legs into antelope so he can run away. And that's Mars, likely, who, because Mars is traveling at a pretty similar speed to the Earth, well, I should say more similar speed to the Earth than others, like Mars is the one that kind of gets to run away from the sun, but the sun will always catch up and take him under. Then Mars spends a lot of time underneath because it takes some time for the sun car, if you will, to pass the Mars car on the chariot race, right? Jupiter not as quick, but I have found that typically in the 399 or 400-day cycle of Sun and Jupiter in our sky, that Jupiter's typically gone for 40 days and 40 nights.
Okay.
It's interesting to
Interesting.
hear that from Hesiod about the Pleiades. I hadn't really actually seen that before. It's a number we often hear around Venus because Venus
Yeah.
spends about 40 days and 40 nights retrograde. It's usually more like 42. But I've also connected that into the Jupiter mysteries, right?
Yeah, because I mean, Venus is not does not disappear for 40 days anywhere close to that. So that's not what that number is in that case. That's really interesting about Jupiter and the 40 days. Yeah.
And Jupiter is going to work much more like a star cycle.
Hmm.
Right. And this is true for Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and then the ones that we can't see with the naked eye, because their orbits are outside of Earth's orbit, or their exterior superior planets, it said, right? They're working more in their heliacal or synodic cycles, more like stars do. But
Hmm.
they're different because they have their own pace, right? And so, like, in a way, the Pleiades are just at the whim of the sun's travel, where
Hmm.
Jupiter's got his own thing, and then like the synodic cycle of Saturn, which is like 378 days, is shorter than that of Jupiter because Saturn's slower, and so the sun laps Saturn more frequently than the sun laps Jupiter. And then
Hmm.
Mars much faster, like Sun Mars cycle is like 780 days, right? Because Mars is just running away from the sun, but then he
Hmm.
gets his. So as we rewind again back here to, oh, I'm on April 26, 2024 in the Stellarium software. We're around this time each year when the Pleiades have their heliacal set, where day by day, now the sun is just taking them under the beams, or let me say, into the cave.
Hmm. Into the cave.
Now,
Yeah.
2024 happened to be one of these years, and this is why I just like Maia's name was Maia's name, right? It happened to be this time when Jupiter was there meeting the Pleiades,
Right.
and that they did this away from the gaze of earthlings and the immortals alike, or however it's written in the hymn, right? Um, And interestingly, you get this energy of night, right? Because it says that like the white arms of Hera are paralyzed by sleep or something like that.
Yeah.
So this last year we had these ingredients for the Jupiter and Maia parts of this story. So let me just continue on with that. Now I'm into May of 2024.
Which also sort of like you were saying before, just to reiterate that, like just shows that sort of marriage of them. They're both setting into the earth, not at the exact same time, like a Paran or something, but they're still both setting and disappearing around the same time.
Right, and we don't know, right? You and
Yeah,
I do because we are living at this amazing dawning of the Aquarian age time where I can go push buttons on chart wheels and softwares. But dude, dig this Galileo's Mercury, right? Like people don't know that Galileo was an astrologer too. Like we have his natal chart in his own pen.
yeah, that's amazing.
Interesting, by the way, there's two different dates, and one is measuring from sunset the day before, because that's how they kept time. And now he's using also in the other date the new convention, which is the whole AM PM thing. Because
Okay.
when Galileo was born in the 16th century in Pisa, like that was just starting to shift. That's kind of a cool thing to see. But Galileo was born
Interesting.
with the sun in Pisces, tropical Pisces, and Mercury in tropical Pisces as well.
Hmm.
Um, some would say sidereal Aquarius might make more sense for him, but his Mercury position's like 5 degrees off from where we believe now, using the modern tables, Mercury was at the time. So like this is how important and how powerful the beams are, right? Like we don't know if things are Paran. Like it's all in the cave. It's all in the
Oh, in the
underworld.
cave.
It's
Yeah,
all in the
totally.
flames. At this point, it's like all guesswork, you know?
Right.
Which is kind of triggering for the astronomer, the mathematician, as we used to call the astrologers. Like we want to know, and so we get better and better at creating these tables that help us track these things, even the ones that we can't see, right? Anyway, so as we move forward here, the sun will eventually conjoin Jupiter conjoin the Pleiades, and now I might as well just go to the morning star side, right? And so I'm going to do that in stellarium here. I'm going to zoom out and we'll just move from nighttime and we'll look east and we'll bring the sun to its ascent, right? And so here, of course, I'm not seeing the Pleiades, or I'm not seeing Jupiter because they're with the sun.
Right.
But as I move through the days now,
They're still in the Zeus and Maia are still in the shadowy cave together.
right. And it's so weird to think of it as a shadowy cave. It's like maybe where some of this breaks down, but what causes shadows? The sun, right? So anyway, eventually here, and this is June 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. This is like my daughter's birth.
Wow.
And Jupiter's now just becoming visible. I find that stellarium astronomy software is pretty good about showing when a planet's visible because you can see like its label show up.
Mm.
So at this point it doesn't, but I can just rewind the minutes, get
So
the
she's
sun
also born
further
at
beneath
the
the
she's born
ground.
at the heliacal rise of Jupiter also.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And then amazingly, like I went out again the day after her birth, and it's the first time I think I had seen Jupiter just a couple days before, and then now I
Wow.
just saw the Pleiades, and they were aligned just like this. I mean, this is
That's
the
so
day after my
amazing.
daughter's birth. I can
Wow.
show you the video sometime, although I'm addressing it to her. And actually, this day saw Aldebaran, which is my rising star.
Wow.
And I just saw them stacked up in this vertical line like this, right? So I have this
Wow.
cast for Athens, Greece right now, but
Yeah.
I live in the Bay Area of California. We're the same distance north of the equator. We experience the same sky as Athens, just like 10 hours later. And Mount Collini, it's like it's the same thing, like they're at the same latitude.
Hmm.
But also imagine peaks of the mountain and trees and things, right? Like we want
Right.
to be more realistic than the stellarium lets us be, but this in a way is more realistic than a chart. Okay, I want to show this to you in a chart now, and I'll just say again, in 2024, like Mercury wasn't really playing the part.
Hmm.
But before we go to the chart, let's go now, and I'm going to look west again. And we are going to see, I'm going to rewind time because we've been at it for an hour, that as the sun set today, which is as we're recording June 10th, 2025, that as Gray was sharing before, Mercury's just re-emerging from the beams of the sun. And it really depends upon the sign, it depends the cycle, where on Earth you're looking from. The chart's going to do a better job for us to show how far Mercury is from the sun right now. And so I'm just putting the sun down beneath the horizon, and we get to see Mercury like 14 degrees away. And so we say the beams is 15. Jupiter's a much brighter being than Mercury. For Venus, 10 degrees is a much better global rule, but I've seen Venus when she's 2 degrees from the sun on the chart, and that's maybe a tale for another time. But this looks like, interestingly, Jupiter being taken under the beams by the sun.
Right.
But the opposite is true for Mercury. And so
Right.
just really quickly, and Gray, I'm looking at our time. I don't know if we want to make this a two-parter or just be really fast through this next bit. Um, but I'll act in the latter way right now. And if we want to take more pace with it, maybe we just cut it here and do a longer one another
Yeah,
time.
yeah. Well, we can also jump to at least show that one idea you have of the older chart. I think we have
Yeah,
time to
yeah.
take care
So
of
I just
that.
need to share one more thing, and typically I would ask you to do this here, but I'm going to do it just because I know I can do it very quickly. I want everybody there to imagine that you are the Earth, and my face is the sun, and then this teacup is Mercury. Okay, so as Mercury orbits the sun, first of all, if you were not in one of the chariots, if you were just in the stadium, it would look like Mercury's going direct half the time and retrograde the other half of the time. Okay, so let's say the direct motion is from the dark side of the moon over there to this plant, right? And then this would be the retrograde motion. But
Mm.
you're actually in a car, so the retrograde motion, which is actually Earth, or Mercury passing Earth, passing between Sun and Earth, That's a pretty short amount of time, as we like to say, about 3 weeks of Mercury's apparent retrograde motion, and about 3 times a year, hence Hermes thrice great, right? I mean,
Mm.
amazingly, in the So Mercurial, there's actually pi Mercury cycles with the sun each year, which is just mind blowing, right? But Mercury actually has two different types of sun conjunctions, right? So there's the retrograde Mercury, which means Mercury passing Earth, closest to Earth, between Earth and Sun, like a new moon would be. And only Mercury and Venus, the interior planets, or I like to say interior decorators, can do that, right?
Hmm.
And that's retrograde Mercury conjunct Sun, where he was an evening star over here. He disappears under the beams. He's reborn as a morning star. And then he takes this journey, short amount of time with Mercury as a visible morning star, and then he goes behind into the beams of the sun like this, and he disappears for a greater amount of time. And in the midst of that, we get this superior conjunction, which means above, or exterior conjunction. So this is direct Mercury conjunct Sun, which is
Hmm.
Earth, Sun, Mercury, versus retrograde Mercury conjunct Sun, which is Earth, Mercury, Sun. Right.
Hmm.
So the dynamics with Mercury and Venus, they're more complicated. And I encourage you to initiate yourself with this visually with Venus. You
Mm.
get a longer period of time to do it. Venus much, much brighter in the sky, achieves greater elongations from the sun, gets really high, rises hours before the sun when she's elongated, sets hours after the sun when she's elongated as an evening star. But when you're out there worshiping Mercury, Venus, Mercury will show up. And then
Mm.
suddenly he's like, you want to get the master class? Because Mercury does this in the most eccentric and abnormal and interesting and wild ways, and it's hard to catch the trickster and many, many other things, right?
Mm.
Okay, so in this year of 2025, now we get Jupiter and Mercury doing this thing that I'll tell you in the Homeric hymn together. Okay, because I'm going to rewind some days and we're going to see Jupiter here going into the cave. Now, the issue, he's not with Maia. He's on the club of Orion,
Yeah.
right? But after or Jupiter is in the cave, Mercury emerges from it.
Hmm.
So that's the birth of Mercury,
Yeah.
okay? And again, if I go back to 2024, then I get the Jupiter Maia piece, but Mercury's doing another thing.
Right.
So what I'm going to do in a chart, and too bad the astronomers don't have this tool because it's so easy. First of all, just so we can track it easier, I'm going to go to a zero Aries wheel chart. I'm actually going to shift because we're going to have to go back in time to see how all this works together from a tropical zodiac to a sidereal zodiac. And in the Fagan-Allen zodiac, which they suggest is closest to what the ancient Babylonians were up to, where you
Right.
place Aldebaran, the eye of the bull, at
Mm.
15 sidereal Taurus, and Antares, the heart of the Scorpio, on the opposite side at 15 sidereal
Yeah.
Scorpio. You get Maia at like 5 Taurus.
Mm.
Okay, and what I can do is I can just move back in time here.
Pretty close to the exaltation of, that's where that idea perhaps of the visible moon and that exaltation degree of the moon.
Yeah, it's
Kind
an
of we
intriguing
can
thing
kind
to
of see that because
consider.
it's in that little area. Yeah. Hmm.
Another one that's intriguing there, by the way, is if the sun's exalted at the 19th degree of Aries,
Hmm.
then it's moon at 3 Leo, where the moon first becomes visible as an evening star.
Oh,
Is
interesting.
that separation between the sun and the moon of about 14 degrees is when the moon shows herself. That's the day after conjunction. Anyway, let's I'm just going to zoom back and I'm going to show you that Jupiter can join Maia and in the cave, right? So close
Right.
to the sun here. This is this 2024 one. But Mercury in his cycle, he's a visible morning star, like this isn't going to be the thing. Because let's just tell the tale and fast forward. Hermes is born, he comes out of the cave. He relieves a turtle of its shell.
Right.
And now he has a drum. And he hears this flute in the distance because Apollo, this great musician, had been sentenced to live a year on earth as a humbled shepherd, right? And he's paying, or I guess herdsman, he's paying no attention to his herd. And probably he felt this drumming in the distance, but he didn't see Hermes at all when he drummed his way into this group of cows and stole them from Apollo, who he did not know was his half brother, right? Another son of Zeus. And Hermes now walks the cows and he's like, wait a second, I'm leaving all of these hoof prints. Like that dude's going to know where I am, right? So geniusly, he walks them backwards now in their own hoof prints. And
Mm.
you can feel in that, of course, Mercury retrograde. And
Mm-hmm.
probably, what's he walking backwards? Cows.
Mm-hmm.
Probably Mercury retrograde in Taurus,
Mm-hmm.
right? And probably
Yeah.
in the constellation of the bull, I would say, even more than in the sign of Taurus, right?
Right. The bull.
He
Exactly.
brings them back to Maia's cave, which for me kind of means he brings them back to the sun. And then the sun, Apollo visits him there. He's cast lots. He's found through divination where this thief is. And now there's two hides of these cows hanging on the cave side. And he comes in and there's this baby and then a bunch of wood nymphs, and everybody knows wood nymphs don't steal cows, so he like shakes the baby down and the nymphs freak out. They're like, what? He's like, you stole my cows, you killed my cows. And they're like, he's a baby, dude, he's 1 day old, he can't even walk. But Hermes laughs and gives himself away. And he's like, what did you do? Why did you kill these cows? And at that moment, the liar, right? Because what he had done is he took guts from one of those cows and he strung the tortoise shell and made the first
Mm.
guitar. And the first
Right.
time with a single instrument where we could hear harmony, where we could hear
Right.
two notes at once.
And even it said seven strings. I've also seen it said sheep strings, which makes me wonder about the Aries connection in there too with
Interesting.
Taurus. But there's a string for each planet, so we've got again that marriage of heaven and earth, and like this earthy tortoise, and stringing it for the seven planets, and
Yeah,
yeah.
in the diatonic scales are the modes in the Western harmony, which came out of Pythagoras, likely in the Greeks. There's eight tones, but the eighth is the same as the first, the octave, right? So you have these 7 note scales. And but I noticed that the lyre that you're wearing has three, and so
Hmm.
does Hermes, right? The circle of spirit, the crescent of soul, and the cross of matter, like the only one of our glyphs that does. And some say it is those three, and maybe it's sun and moon and earth, or Mercury and Jupiter and sun, or who knows, because that's very much in this story. So I'm telling it way too quickly and
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
off script.
Yeah,
But the
it's
way I
totally
like to
good.
tell it is then he's like, Apollo sees this lyre, he accidentally like strums a chord. He's like, what is this thing? Right? What do you call this? And Hermes is like, I don't know. And he says like, well, he just forgets this whole thing that this guy stole his cows and did this stuff and killed a couple of them. And he's like, I just have to have this. Like, what is
Mm.
this? Right? And he's like, well, we could trade for it. He said, well, what would you trade? I don't know. What do you got? He's like, wait a second. How'd you find me? And Apollo says, well, I cast lots, like divination. He's like, well, I'll take that. Right? And so Apollo gives Hermes our craft and divination and the ability to see for this tortoise shell with some cow guts on it in Hermes' mind, which is this greatest invention ever, right? And it's all good in a sense then until he asks, why did he kill the second cow? Wasn't one enough for cow gut strings? And he's like, well, I sacrificed it to the gods. And this is this other invention, it said, of Hermes' first
Mm.
day,
Hmm.
right? And Apollo's like, what do you mean? He's like, well, I figured I might have offended the gods in Olympus by just killing this cow to make an instrument. So I killed another one to offer them, their peace. And Apollo's like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. And he's like, yeah, dude, made one for you. He's like, I cut it into 12 pieces.
Right.
He's like, 12, there's 11 of us. And Hermes says, well, I ate mine. And that's what gets him into real trouble, right? Because here he's stolen. He lied about it initially. He killed, but most importantly, he blasphemed. He called himself a god. So this is when Apollo then takes Hermes up to see Zeus.
Hmm.
And where does that happen? In the morning sky, but I'll get back to that. Who's taking him there? Apollo, the sun.
Right.
And so here's Mercury and Jupiter meeting in the morning sky, and Apollo saying, "Hey, this guy stole, he lied about it, and he blasphemed, he said he's a god." And Zeus is like, "Is that right, son?" And Apollo's like, "Yeah, I just told you." And he's like, "No, is that right, son?" Looking at Hermes. And so this is where Apollo gets to learn that this is his brother.
Hmm.
And Hermes is like, "Yeah, but look, Dad, like this guy gave me divination for a tortoiseshell with guts on it." He's like, and he's totally sleeping on the cows. He's like, I could do that. He's like, I'm crafty, I got commerce, I've got exchange, I can handle the herds, and I'm quick and I'm smart. It's like, put me in, coach. And then it generally goes like this: well, you can earn your winged boots, but you can't lie like that again. And Hermes is like, wait, you would have me tell the whole truth? And Zeus said, no, I would never, right? And then that's it. And now we have our guy. So sorry to tell it in such a way. Please read the Homeric hymn and
Yeah.
look for what I'm saying there. That's why I was saying earlier, I was kind of surprised that even in that early bit, there's like, he made the lyre at midday and then stole
Hmm.
the cows at sunset.
Hmm. Yeah, that's the way yeah, that's kind of like the which I think goes with what we were talking about. So like as we're talking now, he's born, he's becoming visible, he goes out and he creates this lyre, he's stringing it, he's creating some sort of celestial harmony. Um, then it moves into the part where it's sort of like then and Mercury as the evening star becomes visible, eventually stations, goes retrograde, which seems like that lines up then with stealing the cattle, marching them backwards so he's not caught, being hidden. That would go with also like, what we were talking about earlier. When you're under the beams, you can kind of get away with stuff. But then there's this encounter with Apollo, which would be like the inferior conjunction, like you were just describing, that meeting of them. And then he's eventually taken up to Olympus, which would be like Mercury's becoming visible, which is usually around the stationing direct also. And he's then named, like you're saying, he's getting the powers of divination. He's becoming Zeus's messenger. He's been given this like title. He's born back into the world. Um, and
Yeah, so
so,
what's odd to me is like, how could he make the lyre without already stealing the cows?
well, in some of the versions, like I said, it's actually I've seen it with sheep string, for example. But
Hmm.
and there's
And
also an interesting
maybe,
thing where he steals like 50, and then you're right, he does sacrifice 2. And I've seen it said that, that makes 48, which is like divisible by 12, but then he also just divides it by 12. There seems like there's all sorts of things going on that are about there's all sorts of deeper meaning going on here that this hymn is holding that likely has to do with astronomy and calendars and
yeah, the
what's
4 and the
coming in
12,
here.
like the angles and the signs is intriguing. And
Hmm.
yeah, when I started reading that again last night, and clearly I didn't finish, it was like, oh, I need to get a little deeper into this thing, like the 10th moon and all this
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
It's like, I got to spend some time there. Okay, so anyway, yeah, what I'm seeing is this, and let's go find a recent time, and then we'll go back to the old. So the way that I'm investigating this again is I'm just choosing a sidereal zodiac, and then I can just push these buttons here. This is Astro Gold astrology software, and I can just bring Jupiter and Maia. And so here's 2012, right? Because Jupiter generally has a 12-year cycle around the zodiac. So if Jupiter and Maia conjoined near the beam in 2024, it will have happened 12 years before in 2012. Well, here I can see it's happening in the morning star side.
Hmm.
Well, I want to see them doing this as evening stars and not that far from the sun because they want to be in the cave, right? And this is what I was
Right.
saying before. I was like, wow, like this doesn't happen that often. So
Right.
as I kept pushing this button, there's this one in 1941 that's like a maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I rewind days before here,
Yeah, because Mercury's sort of coming out of the sun there a little bit, looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Zeus is coming up towards Maia as he's being taken under the beams. Like we probably get to see them meet. And then Mercury comes through, but Mercury won't really pop out until here. And then his
Mm,
retrograde is in Gemini. Let me say with the twins, not with the bull. And I
right.
wanted to walk the bull backwards,
Rock the
right?
bow
So then I'm
backwards.
like,
Yeah.
so then I'm still hunting. And I found one that I showed you by text. Let me go there. So I'm just bringing Jupiter back.
Is
It
it
was like
1870?
1870.
Yeah,
Yeah.
1870.
So here we have Jupiter and Maia conjoined. Now they're a bit further from the sun. We're probably seeing Mercury already. So
Hmm.
that's like, when the magician's assistant jumps out too early and blows the trick or something like that.
Yeah.
And since I didn't do enough fast stuff here, we're just going to go way, way back. Let me go back by some thousands of years. And we'll get to a time that's maybe more interesting anyway, because it said that the Homeric hymns were written in the like 7th and 6th century. And so there's one here of Jupiter conjoining Maia in 800 BC.
Yeah. So,
And like the stage is set. So in stellarium software, I have to type in -799 because while this is using BC and AD where there's no 0 year, this is using BCE and CE where there is. Okay.
mm,
And so you can see Jupiter here with Maia, and they're just disappearing under the beams. And my argument would be that trees, mountain peaks, which is why I kept saying that, probably would keep a lot of this from view. So I'm just going to rewind actually some days from here where we can see Maia clearly as evening stars. We can see, and we would have seen for years up to this point, that Jupiter's moved through the fish, moved through the ram, coming up to the bull every 12 years-ish, coming to meet Maia, right? But not every time, as we saw, does that happen under the beams of the sun. I would suggest this is one. No, it might be that Mercury's emerging too quickly, that
mm,
he's like born before he's conceived. But if this is all happening under the beams, and amazingly with Venus, with
hmm.
all this love in the air,
I
I
love in the
think we
air.
could
Yeah.
see some sense to that. And then
Yeah.
look at where Mercury's retrograde is. Fun thing here is in stellarium, I can trace Mercury's path. So as I go through the days, and you can see the date in the bottom left, watch how Mercury is now cruising fast forward and then retrograde. And so this is not seen, it's under the beams, but he walks the cows
Right.
backwards. Okay, and now we're around this point. I gotta dim the lights to show it, but Mercury is here conjunct the sun. Let me
Mm.
supersize the planet so Mercury will
So that
show.
would be like Apollo finding Hermes and confronting him essentially
Yeah,
in the
shaking him
cave.
down
Yeah.
in the cave, and all of them are under the beams now too,
Right.
right? So I'm gonna go to the morning side. We'll look east here and watch them rise, right? But of course, we're not going to see any of that because everybody's under the beams of the sun. So let's go back like an hour, and then we'll just continue to move through the days, right? Because as Mercury now walks the cows backwards, the sun, Apollo, is bringing Mercury up to meet
Oh yeah. Oh, that's great.
Zeus
Yeah. Mm.
in Olympus, right above
Yeah.
the ground. And Mercury and Zeus, we can never see having a meeting like up towards the midheaven because Mercury's always so close to the sun. But yeah, bringing the ground back in, and let me take the supersize of the planets away. It's sometime around here, or the following days, where Mercury and Jupiter together are having their
Right.
heliacal rise after Mercury walked the cows
Right.
backwards, or walked really, it's Mercury walking backwards through the cow constellation.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's really amazing. I love that image. You can really see that how it's like Apollo leading him up as they're kind of rising ahead of Mercury's rising ahead and going up to sort of rising with Jupiter, like up to Mount Olympus. That's really cool.
Yeah, no, I hadn't thought of this yet, but Apollo, in a way, is the cave the first time, the beams of the sun. Although he's out of the cave playing his flute, and I don't know what to do with that. Um, but the next time Maia's out of the cave, right? Maia's had her heliacal rise. The Pleiades have had their heliacal rise. So
Right.
now Apollo's really that one who's bringing Mercury up to Olympus
Hmm.
to see Zeus. And yeah, I've been saying for years now, like, because the astronomical conditions of this story are so rare, Jupiter conjunct Pleiades every 12 years, but Jupiter conjunct Pleiades under the beams, not nearly as common. Jupiter conjunct Pleiades under the beams with Mercury just about to emerge as an evening star. Crazy rare. As I was playing, it seems like maybe it happens every like, what was it, 200 and 170 years minimum
Okay.
as a
Interesting.
frequency. It's like 23 Jupiter cycles, but like the conditions just aren't met. And as I went back in time and learned that it's 800 BC, it was like, oh
That's
yeah.
pretty amazing that it would land at 800 BC, to be honest. Yeah. Because that's ballpark area.
Yeah, I feel like this was an astronomical experience. The bards, to use the wrong term for Greece, like witnessed and then stitched it into this Homeric hymn that in a way like helped us understand what Mercury is and does.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a really, if anyone has not read the Homeric Hymn, you can definitely find it online, and it gives a lot of information that you can get a sense of the meaning of Mercury in astrology. Absolutely. Well, awesome. I know you have to get going. Thank you so much, though, for doing this with me. This is really illuminating and revelatory, which befits the nature of Hermes and Mercury for sure. Is there anything, just while you're here, do you have any upcoming class? I know you're often teaching, have courses and things like that. Anything that's coming up you'd want to let people know about?
One of my prime devotions is to help astrologers reclaim a connection to the living sky. So I've taught astronomy for astrologers and what I like to call sacred astronomy for astrologers. Um, Many times in the past, I'm just starting to kind of recreate a lot of that work because I think it's very important for people to have uh, the information of moving things taught through moving pictures. So I spent a lot of time creating animations and different illustrations to help bring that to life for people and always tell them, hey, you got to get away from the small screen and get out with the big screen of the living sky instead of practice. So the long vision is going to be this way to connect to the sky through a series of self-initiatory practices.
Cool.
Starting with put a stick in the ground and do the shadow work and right, honor the directions and how do we work with the sun at the midheaven. So that's the long vision. There's going to be one that's happening sooner that I just following my devotion to create like an essential astronomy for astrologers that I'm hoping I can descend to all the educators. Is it just a place where people can go to get like at least the basics? It shocks me when I connect with somebody who's been through level 2 or 3 of some school or another and they never learned that the ascendant descendant is the horizon.
Wow, that is
And I've
surprising.
seen it a bunch, which is
Wow.
just wild to me. Or this idea that like a planet close to the sun is just means the sun is going to increase that planet's essence, which is in a sense okay with me. Like
Mm-hmm.
do the astrology that you do, but let's also understand that that means that that planet's now not visible and behind the sun or whatever, right? So
Mm-hmm.
those are some things I'm going to be teaching soon, a Turning of the Ages series.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, that helps people understand like the very real and beautiful and elegant Earth astrology of the tropical zodiac, what the sidereal zodiacs are, and constellational zodiacs, and how we need to look at the interface of the heaven zodiac sidereal and the earthly zodiac tropical to understand more about where we are in the turning of the ages. Like, when is this spawning of the age of Aquarius, right? And the importance of the galactic alignment that's happening now, which, by the way, we gave a few keys of it earlier, with Regulus at a cusp and the Pleiades at a cusp. So that's
Mm.
coming soon to a theater called You, question mark. If you'd like to learn more about it, head over to geminibrett.com and sign up on my mailing list while you're there. If you want to do a session and look at the stars at the time of your birth, which I love to do as much as working with the signs, book a session. And you can also check out Constellations Community, which is the community membership at the School of Astrology, where my partner Scorpia Anna and I are leading slow orbits around each of the planets. We're doing 1 month at a time for the sun
Oh,
and the
awesome.
moon, and it's so nice to like take some pace with that. So, yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to share. And for anybody who's hearing that I have not yet had the pleasure to meet, it's nice to meet you. And I hope we get to connect more in space and maybe even on Earth someday.
Yeah, awesome. And I know you also had a really great NORAC talk that also went into house division. Are you going to end up having that on your site to sell
I
at some
likely
point?
will, I probably will teach that at length too. That was a 75-minute that went pretty long. I think I'll put that talk up, which is synthesizing several systems of celestial house division.
Yeah,
But really, that one also wants like a bit of a course where we spend some time with
yeah,
what are
probably
the
makes
houses,
sense.
why do we divide the sky, and then more time for chart work because
Hmm.
true to the Gemini moniker that chose me, I like to use many house systems kind of
Right.
simultaneously, and there is a rhyme and a reason, and I find that it opens gateways that I wouldn't see through the eyes of one alone. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that was a great talk at NORAC. Well, thank you so much for being here with me. This is awesome.
Ryan Gray, thanks for having me and thanks for letting me go at length. We got a
Yeah,
lot done
we had a
and
lot. We covered
not
a
the
lot.
shortest
Yeah,
amount of time, but
yeah,
hopefully that lands for people. I'd love to know what you think about it. I look forward to
yeah.
tuning in with some of the comments on this video. And Gray, I can't wait to just build more with you in the future. It's really great to connect. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.